All right, good evening, folks. Welcome to another episode of vBrownBag. We are very excited this evening. We've got the oddly labeled Corey Quinn on the show with us this evening. We are going to be doing a Q&A with Corey Quinn. As you know, reInvent finished up 2 weeks ago. We've seen a lot of information come out from the show. We've seen a lot of announcements. And we wanted to get Corey's take on it. So we had a little bit of a chat. Corey and I did a Screaming in the Cloud a couple of months back, decided that we had so much fun that we needed to have a reprise, a redo. And so we invited us, Sean Doyle, my co-host, and 383 of our closest friends to ask us some questions about reInvent and to pose them to Corey and learn about them in his inimitable fashion. So let me get some show notes done first before we get into it. Getting on the conversation. If you are live in the studio audience and you want to ask some questions, feel free to add them into the Q&A or in the chat channel. Or if you are on Twitter and you want to @vBrownBag or #vBrownBag, we will be paying attention and we will pose the questions. Once again, our guest this evening is Corey Quinn. You can find him on Twitter @QuinnyPig, QUINN, 2 N's, YPIG. He is effusive on Twitter. He has a lot of things to say and he says them very well and in a very hilarious format as well. I'm your host.
I sure do love the sound of my own voice.
And so Corey, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to listen to me. I hope you all enjoy it half as much as I do.
We will be on pins and needles. All right. My name is Chris Williams. I highly discourage you from following me. I can be found @MistWire on the Twitter sphere as well. Sean?
And I'm Sean Doyle. I can find a mute button on Zoom. I am @CloudOsmotic on Twitter. Yeah.
I do like the fact that all three of us are wearing our most comfortable post reInvent swag. I've got the Datadog t-shirt and the obligatory hoodie. Sean's, I think that's the 2019. Is that the 2019, Sean?
Very good. Look at you. 2019. That's right. With the glow in the dark message.
Do you know what the message says?
Chosen ones.
Do you know what the message says?
I think it says AWS certified, doesn't it? I don't remember.
I thought it said awesome. It doesn't matter.
Oh,
all right. So let's get into it. Mr. Quinn, how have you been, sir?
Not dead yet, but there's still a few hours left in the day here on the West Coast.
Give it time. We will. Oops, no, don't save. There we go. Now it's just a cozy conversation between the three of us. Awesome. So we are 2 weeks out from reInvent. People have had a chance to digest things. You have made a ton of videos, post, during, and pre from reInvent, and I have a boatload of questions here. But what I wanted to do first was just to hear from you. How have you been? How are you doing? What's been going on in the past 2 weeks? How has the Duckbill Group been treating you? And what's going on in your world?
It's been a bit of a challenge because it's like, okay, great. I wanted to reInvent is over. It's like, oh my God, I just want to take a nap. And so did US East 1. So I didn't really get to, because when that happens, I tend to have to answer a whole mess of questions about a whole mess of different things, which is fair because most of the world, as it turns out, does not particularly care about how the internet works until it doesn't anymore. And then they have the standard questions of who's responsible for this? And the answer is, agents of chaos. It happens. Like the systems break, circuitry burns. That's how it works. And it's like, that was always challenging. There's always the catching up on things I'd been avoiding for a couple of months in the pre-reInvent rush, like, my children. So it's been nice to spend a little bit of time back here getting used to some semblance of normalcy. I spent most of the first week home in a hotel until I tested clean, just because, killing my young children should be something I do with intentionality, not by accident.
Makes sense. I mean, sometimes we won't get into that part. That's actually a really good segue into one of the questions that we have had posted. We've bucketized the questions into a couple of different fields. Some of them clearly were from content developers that wanted to know your vibe and how you did things. Some of them are from AWS people that want to know about cost optimization, like, your day job. They want to ask you questions about that. And then some people want to know about the personality. So
Yes, I have one of those.
The online personality.
It's remarkably true to life. Yeah. Please, by all means.
So dealer's choice, which of the subgroups, which ones would you like to go with?
Well, let's start with logistics. That should be relatively quick, and then we'll dive into other nonsense.
Okay, so from the logistics perspective, you know what? I didn't bucket them. All right, hold on. Okay, so logistically, what do you have to do to prep for reInvent? And did the pandemic drastically change how you did things from previous years?
That is a good question. I had to do a whole bunch of things and should have done more. We wanted to bring in a project manager 3 weeks before reInvent. Don't do that. I should have brought them in June. There was a lot of stuff. We had sponsors buying things. I made some mistakes. For example, I didn't actually sit down and do a run through of what is going to be going out when and at what time. So we were double booked in some cases. There are multiple newsletters coming out a day at one point. It's like, this should not really be happening. So, okay, learning opportunity for next year. It's bigger than it used to be. Like, reInvent was smaller, but when quarantine started, my audience was less than a third of the size it is now. I didn't know how that was going to play out. Getting a mask in the shape of my own face was awesome. It was deeply disturbing, which is awesome, but there is...
I was going to say super creepy.
Right. But as a counterbalance, people could see me. There was a hidden component to that too, which is when I had to get somewhere in a hurry, I put on a regular mask and no one was looking for me.
Oh, nice.
There were some tight production deadline turnaround stuff. Right after Adam Silipsky's keynote, I had a car waiting for me to take me to a recording studio about 4 miles away, where I wound up doing the recording. It was done within an hour. And then, like, talk about logistics mishaps, they had a 25 megabit uplink to upload 20 gigs of video, and that took some time.
Yeah.
And then to the producer. So it was supposed to come out by 3 o'clock that afternoon. We got out, I think, at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. or something.
And did you do that for every keynote? Was it
just the one? In hindsight, because again, this was something that was unpredictable, but in previous years, Andy Jassy gets on stage for a 2.5 hour keynote, takes one enormous breath, and then just spews the like a giant list of announcements. And it's like, okay, how do we decompress that? They spread them out this year, and I like the pacing quite a bit, but I was preparing to have to rebut a whole pile of announcements, and instead wound up rebutting 10 of them. So, okay, I've got to have a little bit of filler here, which is fine. It's just you don't actually know what's going to come and when and how it hits and whatnot. It's fun. I like seeing the excitement. I like seeing the way that this winds up getting handled. But that's what I've seen.
Nice. And so that obviously, I mean, from the follow-up to that was, was the difference drastic from how you fielded them previously? Like
well, last year was fully virtual, and the year before that, it was mostly done as a hobby. My media business, as it wasn't really a business then so much as it was a side project. And it's like, I was super excited because, wait, someone's gonna actually pay me to wind up promoting something. Oh my God, this pays for my trip. And you know, it was a smaller scale thing where I'd like, I have 2 talks to give, and I don't know how I'm going to contain myself. And I'm busier now.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Next time I team with me, because I was entirely solo for all of the production stuff, and that is not advisable in hindsight.
So that's a fantastic segue into another follow-up question from the logistics perspective. How do you generate so much content in such a short period of time? It's not a solo endeavor anymore.
I didn't prepare for this, for example. Same way. When you suck at preparing for things, you've got to be good at improv. And that means that there's a lot of, like, most of my jokes when I'm tweeting or when I'm talking are off the top of my head. And it just how I operate. I can sit down when I'm in the right mood and power through a 1,000-word blog post in about 20 minutes. I've built a bunch of automation around the newsletter stuff that reduces it to about 20 to 30 minutes a day, a week to write the newsletter that go out. And all right, well, some people listen to podcasts. I'm not really a podcasting person. I'm not really a podcast listener, but okay, I can definitely do a proofreading session out loud into a microphone, which lets me catch a few things I wouldn't have otherwise. But there's also a team of people that help with this. I mean, I write all of the content, but that's it. I don't deal with any of the putting it into the CMS. I don't deal with scheduling the emails to go out. I mean, everything that goes out under my name is from me. Let's be very clear on this. But my particular expression of ADHD means that I will record a podcast and then not actually copy the files over to the production team so they can get it up and ready to go. So that has to be automated. And I do that with a couple of tools floating around here that sit around and wait for files to show up and move them into the right place.
So automation is the key.
Automation,
even in your world.
And sometimes the best kind of automation is to throw someone who's good at following a checklist at it.
Nice. Cool. Okay. Sean, did you, I don't want to bogart the Q&A here. So I definitely wanted you to get your voice in here as well.
No, those are great questions. And yeah, I had the same question as well. You know, you generate a lot of material and multiple podcasts and newsletters and things like that. So I was very interested to hear how you sort of navigated that as well. I've been sort of trying to get into the whole blogosphere, as it were, and just time, right? It's just difficult so that's very interesting to hear your perspective there, especially the automation piece. I'll look into tips around there. We actually already have some Q&As coming in. So, and I don't know if we want to keep on the reInvent questions, or one question I think, yeah, let's see here. What were your favorite announcements from reInvent? Let's just stay on that topic before we hop over to another bucket. So what were your favorite reInvent announcements this year?
I love their new managed database service.
Just that one?
Yes, because they didn't have one, and that's my favorite part about it. We don't need another one of those things. We have plenty. I liked the fact that it was focusing on improving the baseline services they have, which is a beautiful marketing spin on we missed some deadlines and can't release these things now. So, okay. But focusing on things like intelligent tiering for S3, that's great. Open ZFS support on FSX is amazingly awesome for, 10 years ago, but that's okay. Some things will never change, like my love for ZFS. People say blockchain fixes this. No. ZFS fixes this.
Right.
Or ZFS for our friends across the pond.
Depending on where you're from.
We've also had a few come in on the whole on the QA and the other side as well, the regular chat channel. But I think that goes back to the question before with how do you deal with content burnout? Like you've talked about improv and things of that nature, but how do you deal with,
or do you even experience it at all? I mean, do you
experience
get content burnout?
Yeah.
The nice thing about the way that I write last week in AWS, and well, let's ignore the screaming in the cloud thing is separate. I didn't have to do much of that right around reInvent, just because it turns out that doing interviews and you can do them in advance and schedule them out, great. That was easy. That's always a different conversation. But the nice thing about the blog posts I write is that last week in AWS is functionally my personal brand, more or less. I can say whatever the hell I want to, which means that I don't really want to talk about this weird element of cloud economics this week. Great. Let's instead talk about something completely unrelated. Why not? Maybe it's a discussion of how the ecosystem is evolving. Maybe it's a glorious shit post in long form. Maybe it's something else, but that is, I can write whatever I want to, and that's fun. What's on my mind? I'll vent it.
So you keep it fresh by just following what's the things that interest you.
Yeah, the content, honestly, my people think that the snark and the sarcasm and whatnot is there to, I don't know, force a particular edge. And maybe it is, but honestly, the reason it's there is, in all seriousness, for me, because this stuff is, let's be objective here, it's pretty boring. So my challenge is always, how can I keep it fresh as far as the jokes they're not tired and retreading the same lines without going too far into, okay, now I'm just being a jerk. And I don't always get it right, let's be clear here, but it's a constant invigorating exercise because it's really a constant challenge in a way that's fun. Like you have something super boring, like it came out today that Goldman Sachs is using some AWS services to do persona tagging of the people they talk to. It's like, how do I turn that into a joke? Rich dad, poor dad. There we go.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I mean, especially in the IT sphere, right? I had an old manager who said, if you don't have a sense of humor in this industry, good luck. So, um,
If
it's
you don't
very,
laugh, you'll
very
cry.
true. Yeah.
True. Okay. So we are awash in questions now. So let's is it okay to flip over to non-logistical questions
Sure.
and aim them more towards services
Do I
and
strike you as someone who thinks in a structured way? Come on.
well, okay, all right. We'll just start at the top of the list and work our way down then. What that's a little bit personal. All right, what is the one service that hasn't been made yet that you really want to see?
Honestly, it's the single change I would make to AWS, and it's not a particularly close change. I'd fix the free tier. I think that there needs to be a way that you can be guaranteed not to get charged, or alternately pick some arbitrary amount of money. Maybe it's $20, maybe it's $50. You will never be charged more than this. Because we had that issue with Robinhood earlier this year where some poor kid saw that he was 730 grand in debt, which he wasn't, and killed himself.
Yeah,
And I can absolutely see a billing mishap where it's people are getting surprised $60,000 bills on free tier accounts.
right.
That is going to end in tragedy, and that has to get fixed before anything else does. Because I'm sorry, there's nothing else that's that important. The reason I enjoy and have the fun that I do with this is that it's cloud computing. It doesn't kill people. I don't want that to
And
start
the
changing.
yeah, and the entire concept of the free tier is you don't have a lot of money. You're
If
trying to learn something.
if Oracle Cloud can nail this, and they have, then why the hell can't AWS? And yeah, I can't believe either the fact that I'm sitting here saying this is kind of amazing that Oracle of all companies is winning on a pricing thing. That has never happened.
They have a lot of so we did a cloud field day with Oracle right when Oracle Cloud came out, and the very first thing that they came up and said to us was, we know we have a lot of work to do, and that we've got a really bad reputation for a lot of good reasons. It was a refreshingly honest take from Oracle for them to say the things that they said to us on camera, recorded about how much they sucked. And their pricing is surprisingly good. Like if you do a comparison, like a CPU to CPU comparison of Oracle Cloud with AWS right now, they've got them beat. I mean, you know that they're cutting their throat behind the curtains, but
When Oracle Cloud sponsors Screaming in the Cloud, and when that request came in, it's like, who is this really? And again, they have to follow the same two rules that every sponsor does, which is one, you're not allowed to lie to the audience, full stop, and two, you have to convince me that using you will not leave your target customer worse off than if they hadn't. It's not a particularly high bar. Most companies are able to clear that, and they can. I've kicked the tires in Oracle Cloud, and it is legitimate. Let's be clear here. So yeah, game on. I like competition. My actual goal of 10 years from now is, let's say I want to build something, a new application somewhere. What cloud provider should I build this on? Should be a hard question, and not because they're all shitty, but rather because they're all great and there's no right answer and then a bunch of second place answers.
right. And Nathan Bennett in the audience just mentioned that OCI training is free until the end of the month on their training and certification tier right now. Nice.
Excellent.
Okay. Follow-up question to the one service that hasn't been made. What is the one change to an existing service that you really want to see made?
S3, I want to be able to have a bucket and say that this is the tier that all object uploads to this bucket go into by default. Sure, maybe you can override it, maybe not. But if I want to upload things into intelligent tiering, which now for most things is the right answer, okay, great. Let's go ahead and do that. But now if I upload things, I have a bunch of applications that don't speak that language. So I have to do it with a lifecycle policy, which means if I'm doing this at large scale, there are transition costs for that. So it's just let me set that policy on a bucket level and not have to teach a bunch of legacy apps about this.
And then what the data? So I don't see how intelligent tiering doesn't fix that. What is it that you're
it absolutely
wanting?
does. But if you upload to a bucket right now, you cannot say on the bucket side that, yeah, everything that gets put into you is going to be in this particular storage class by default. You can do it with lifecycle policies, such as whenever you get an object, transition it to this thing, but that's an additional step that incurs a cost, which at scale can be significant. What I want to see is the ability to just say everything in this bucket now, great. It's intelligent tiering, or it's infrequent access, or it's just delete it and drop it on the floor, or whatever it is I want to have it do. I've done with that.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Oh, interesting. Okay, here we go. I know that snark is your thing, but what service or services do you think really truly deserve your ire?
That's a really good question. There are services that haven't arrived yet. I'll agree with that. I think that there are definitely things that are still evolving. The nice thing about AWS services is they don't get worse with the passage of time. At worst case, they just stay exactly as they are. APIs are considered promises. The things that actually cause my ire are really things that do not directly benefit customers. When it launched, MemoryDB was nowhere near ready. It was a colossal train wreck. But in the fullness of time, yes, it's going to become something solid and legitimate. I just made a bunch of fun of app config because the docs are barren, the console does not make it clear how this works. I'd be willing to bet a year from now that is no longer true. These things do improve and do get better. The things that annoy me about AWS and that actually that send me into let's have a conversation about that. Honestly, it's the cases where people use it. It doesn't do what they thought it was going to do because the failure mode naturally, it happens to me, it happens to everyone, is, oh, I'm stupid and no one ever told me. No, this stuff is complicated and the user experience is, so it is not you. It is the system itself. Part of the reason I wind up calling these things out so publicly is just to spread the awareness that this is not you. This is a sharp edge. That's important.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah, that's definitely important. And one of the new announcements at reInvent that triggered that for me in my head here, just thinking about that, is that S3, the default ACL change. Sorry, not the default ACL
you can disable
change.
ACLs because, again, S3 predated IAM by 5 years. Yeah, that's
right. And
a
they're
different
saying,
direction. Don't use it anymore.
So when that came out, I actually went and read the docs, and they said, we actually recommend that you do this on all new buckets, but the default's still the same. And it's like, well, if this is something that you're recommending to do, shouldn't the default be this on all new things?
I
Like,
can see a scenario in which they give that guidance, but they want to see how it impacts. Because what I would like to see then, like I think the next stage on that is, okay, they're going to try this for a while, I presume. Then at some point you have an account-wide setting that, cool, all new S3 buckets will now default to have this being set. Right. Followed by eventually, depending on what they see, because they have a lot more customers external than they do internally. Everyone uses AWS for something. They'll find the corner cases and the Vertus cases and the rest. And then they're going to ideally figure out, okay, now that we can control for those, now it becomes a default. But I got to say, I'm on their side on this one because, yeah, we're just going to automatically change a default the way this thing gets set up. And if you don't realize that change is coming, suddenly someone's deploy process or production thing that was set up 5 years ago suddenly breaks everywhere.
Yep.
They cannot break customers. They are allergic to causing that kind of breakage. And they're right.
Sure.
So I agree with what you're saying, but I would love to have the ability to set this on an account-wide basis with calling out the caveats. I can also see why they want to see what the actual impact of this is. And I'd be shocked if they weren't closely tracking all these issues and to see what the support cases say about this. Like, what haven't we thought of? Because, again, you can build something that's amazing, and then I'm going to use it as a database or something horrifying like that. And, okay, we found some sharp edges we didn't even consider.
And that's probably the same modality that they use for the whole, like, account-wide block public access with S3. Because, I mean, nowadays, there's really no reason to have a public S3 bucket. Like, really? Well, I mean, that could be argued, but from a security perspective, like, there's really no reason to have a public S3 bucket. And they probably did the same thing, right? Where they enabled it on a bucket by bucket basis, watched, learned, and then said, oh, well, let's add the button for account wide. So that, yeah, you're probably, that's probably exactly the same mindset they're moving here with this one, I would imagine. Yeah. I just found it interesting where it's like you said, it's just this, unless you read the docs and say, oh, this is the best practice, not like when I'm turning on by default, because a lot of people may not necessarily get that deep when they'll just be like, oh, I need a bucket, click, right? I don't understand. So anyway.
I'm giggling because comments in the sections are egress charges, managed NAT gateways, all the
Yeah.
things that you rail on about.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And again,
Okay.
these things are annoying and they're surprising and they cause pain to customers. And I don't like that. But do they deserve, again, the pricing of the managed NAT gateway? Yeah, I absolutely want to beat that up. But the service itself is useful. It's good. There's a lot of value to it. Just maybe not make it cost the better part of a kidney. Like that's sort of all, that's what my ask is. But the service itself is very solid, especially with its new improvements to speak a 4 to 6 IPv6 translation.
Right. Okay. So David Soul is asking, was there something as good as GP3 from last year, money-wise, this year?
Intelligent tiering.
That was your big win
Yes,
for this year?
because they now Glacier is instant retrieval Glacier, and for significantly large objects and for sufficiently large data volumes. Not only is this a giant money saver, though there are a few exception cases, the real value there economically is you don't have to think about it; just do it.
Nice. Okay. Cool.
They made a bunch of changes to intelligent tiering lately that make the old version of intelligent tiering look kind of like simpleton tiering.
I need to look into that again.
There's no longer a 30-day minimum, and they don't charge a monitoring fee on objects less than 128 kilobytes. They really should do that somewhere between 200 to 300, just because the monitoring charge does outweigh the savings. But we'll get there.
Okay. So the follow up from David on that one was, oh well, that's more back into reInvent. Hold on, let's stick with pricing for a little bit since we're on that topic. Sean, did you have a couple on pricing?
Yeah. So just related to, and this is actually something similar that Ken posted in the Q&A, but you've probably run into a lot of similar situations in your customers, time and time again. What are some of the most, like, if you could give, number one thing that you would recommend to customers that could, I guess there's two questions here. The first one, I'll ask the first one, like, what would be the number one thing you could recommend customers to proactively prevent a high AWS bill?
It's counterintuitive, but the way that I view AWS bills in my customer environments, no one is upset because the bill is high. They think they are. But in practice, it looks a lot closer to the bill is unpredictable. So let's be clear on this. I am not generally advocating for, AWS should charge less for these services. I advocate for it being predictable. I advocate for it being reasonably commensurate with the value it provides. In some cases, I would be fine with a price increase, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but it's true. That said, understand what's going on in your environment. Be sure that you can allocate accordingly. Early decisions are important, like setting up an organization structure, so you don't wind up with everything in one account, and then it's sort of a murder mystery to figure out what caused it.
Yep.
Delete things you're not using. Lifecycle policies for data are important. Have a data strategy, which isn't, worry about it some other time. Have a budget alarms are generally a good thing. But ultimately, cost and architecture in cloud are the same thing. Oh, someone said that they didn't fully catch a comment about drop the 30-day minimum requirement.
I got it.
Yeah, there's a monitor. Yeah, intelligent tiering no longer has a 30-day minimum storage charge. It gets prorated if you delete something after 20 minutes. No, that's gone now.
Nice. And that actually ties in with Margot Beck's question of what do you think is the most common mistake customers make in AWS? Could be technical utilization, et cetera. Was that covered by the answer that you just gave?
No, people make all kinds of mistakes, and I don't think that necessarily. Are we bounding this to cost? Or are we bounding this to something else?
No. Could be technical, could be utilization, could be cost.
I think that people go into cloud with the assumption that we're going to save money. You will not. Let's be clear. The value of cloud is not in cost. It is in capability. It will speed your ability to deliver things, and viewed in that light, it can be an incredible force multiplier. People go into it for the wrong reasons. People also expect the idea that cloud is going to be some sort of panacea that solves all the problems they've got.
It's not?
Right? No. The way that thing it is called agile consulting. Go sign up for some of that. It's going to be awesome. I'm sure. No, but there are different mistakes that get made all the time. The biggest mistake people make, and isn't even particular to AWS. it's universal. The platform evolves and gets better. Everything tends to. Once someone learns a thing, they don't go back later to validate that it's still true.
Mm.
And people who started using the cloud in 2008, in many cases, have a 2012 or so level understanding of AWS's limits, capabilities, etc. It's no longer true.
So they're not staying up to speed on the most recent architectural changes that could greatly benefit them as an organization or as a business use case.
Exactly. That's how I see it. Anyway.
Nice. Okay. What is Corey's favorite EDM artist? Dup, 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 dup.
No, honestly, it's when I improperly load the washing machine and it starts making that dump 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 dump.
So you did not spend any time at replay. Oh no.
Yeah, exactly.
So you didn't go to replay is what you're saying.
No, I went. It was fun. It's good to wind up spending time with people that have only been like faces in Zoom for too long. It's bounded to a square or sometimes a rectangle, and it's time bound as well, as opposed to just hanging out and talking to people. And in many cases, people are less willing to be honest and transparent what's really going on over a video chat. And it's way easier to get like roadmap information with oh, I can't tell you that. Like, really? Let me buy you 8 beers and then see what we can talk about. And it's the social.
Let me tell you something, Corey.
Exactly. It's nice to see people in person again for higher bandwidth conversations. Truly.
Nice. Yeah, I totally agree. I had a really good time chatting with folks. Had interesting discussion with Randall Hunt at Replay. That for a later date. Keith Townsend, the CTO advisor, has a question for us. Are you seeing a shift in the number of born in the cloud customers versus companies moving to public cloud? And if so, what are any of the differences and challenges, if any?
In my client base, there are, understand that I tend to wind up viewing it as anecdata. I would not call this necessarily anything that is representative of larger trends. I want to be clear on that. AWS boasts millions of customers, and good for them. It's every time I think I've seen it all I have to do is talk to one more customer. What I have done historically when I started out, biased heavily for born in the cloud companies, because let's be very honest with ourselves here, it takes time to start spending $150 million a year on AWS. You're not going to do that overnight unless you spin up 4 managed NAT gateways. So it's not easy to get there, and those tend to be the companies that are generally jumping in pretty early on. I mean, particularly Netflix, for example, they're not born in the cloud, even though they're one of the cloudiest companies out there. They were a migration story. There's always different folks doing different things. It's clear that AWS is heavily targeting enterprise with a lot of their renewed focus. And on some level, it feels like the people they have attracted historically, the developers, the web-facing folks, are now, they're talking about, here's what you use to run your giant fleet of robots. And some of us are sitting there going, well, I don't really have a robot army strategy yet. Maybe I should. We'll see how that goes. But so it's a little discordant. Every service is for someone, but no service is for everyone, except the bill.
Okay, so Nathan Bennett, favorite company that had no DR for the AWS outage?
Probably AWS.
Like
the Route 53 control plane, little things.
All the things on the internal network, including the service ticketing process.
The status page. Oh yeah. That was fun. No, I honestly don't want to sit here and shame companies for outages. It doesn't go super well, but I had a whole thing that went out today that my concern is there are very clearly a whole bunch of things that single track through US East 1. And that is a serious wake-up call in many respects for what does your DR plan look like? If you can't update DNS for 7 minutes, throw the rest of your DR plan away because none of it's going to work. Give up. And so someone like, oh, they went down because they didn't have a DR plan. No, they made very sensible decisions based upon what we have all been told for a long time. That's one of those things where, okay, now that we have to understand that particular type of failure mode, let's dive in. Let's go deeper.
Keith's follow-up to your statement just now, should we worried about these AWS single points of failure out of our control, i.e. can we actually protect against them?
Who's we in this case? For example, I have things that go down that are in single regions. Like my newsletter publication system, which is a Byzantine horror, lives entirely in US West 2. Because if that region goes down for more than a day or so, and I have to write an email newsletter by hand, let's be very clear here. I have to write a very different newsletter that week. I can do that one by hand, by falling back to my original process by which I did it, Google Docs.
As you are rage typing.
We've still lost a whole shit ton of stuff that's critically important and the stock market is affected now. Yeah. Turns out no one's actually going to care about the 87th service called SageMaker at that point. That can wait another week.
Side note, is stoplying.cloud, is that you? Or it is you, okay.
And that went down today because I put it in Oregon because why not? Like, honestly, I was looking into what it takes. I was talking to my the solutions architect assigned to my account. And fundamentally, it's become pretty clear that it's an impossibility because what I'm trying to do with AWS native services is guard against an entire myriad list of failure modes that are not fully known. It's the circular dependency problem. Honestly, if I'm serious about doing it and it survives all things, it should effectively live on a different provider. And honestly, the joke isn't that good. It's fun, but come on.
All right. Okay. Back to reInvent. David Soul. What would be the more important change that you would make to make reInvent better? To longer, shorter?
It has to be a virtual first environment, clearly. It can't just be like, and then we threw some videos up on the website because there's a huge accessibility story. Right now, like the first class citizen story is go to Las Vegas in person. Yeah, I live in San Francisco. And when I got to Las Vegas on the Strip, my first response was, wow, things here are really expensive. That is ridiculous. That should not happen. There's a tremendous amount of privilege that goes into that sort of experience because it's not just the money. It's I can afford to take time off from work. I'm geographically in the right place. There's a whole bunch of things that need to be addressed. And making it virtual first is a way to do that, to engage the community, to drive things forward. They've come leaps and bounds from where they were, let's be clear. But customers are constantly dissatisfied.
That's still awful.
Remember 2015? Yeah.
I don't. I've probably blocked it out. I'm just thinking of the experience this year with the scheduler and the reInvent videos, and it was just so this was something that actually came up. If you remember last year when it was virtualized, they actually built a VR city, and people could go into the VR city and like go to the keynotes and go to sessions and walk around and talk to people and everything.
Yes.
That's a brilliant answer right there. Anybody with a VR headset or a smartphone could wander around inside of a little VR village and go to the sessions that they wanted to go to. And I was a huge proponent and advocate of actually blowing that out and having more than just the heroes and some VIP people have access to that. Just give that as the default option for everybody, as a virtual attendee. That way the people in Vegas have an experience, but the people outside of Vegas also have a different and unique experience.
Yeah,
send an Oculus headset as part of the official swag that year, so everybody can participate.
If the price of the ticket is high enough, they can certainly afford to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The real driver behind trying to get back in-person events is functionally it's a partner sales effort because
sure
it is not the big business that happens at reInvent is that people aren't signing deals necessarily, but it's the FaceTime you get with executives at your customer and being able to have a high bandwidth conversation. The value of reInvent, at least to me, is not sitting in extending a line for 45 minutes to get into a session where the video is going to be on YouTube next week. And I'd much rather spend that time having conversations with people, getting to know the person who's giving the talk about DynamoDB, so that when 6 months from now I have a question if I'm trying to use DynamoDB as a DNS server, I can reach out to them and have the conversation because I can go back and watch the talk. It's the relationship that's a valuable thing.
I'm actually stealing that phrase, the high bandwidth conversation. That's a really good way to describe that.
I'm sure I did not come up with that.
We will pay it forward to whoever gave you the original attribution for that. Okay, so attendee FM, who is named FM. What are your thoughts about Cloudflare's R2 object storage as a competitor to AWS S3? Zero egress bandwidth fees. Sounds like they are getting it right.
I did a whole blog post on it, and then I had a podcast interview with Matthew Prince talking about it. It hasn't shipped yet. So to be clear, it is vaporware, which, vapor, cloud, there's something there. But once it launches and we start seeing how this performs and is used at scale, then I'm going to have some opinions on this. I love the idea. The math is compelling. I gave an example of, you have a 1 gigabyte file sitting in S3 and it goes super viral and 1 million people download it. You are going to, using AWS, congratulations, here's your $42,000 bill. If
Right.
you're ish, because you never know where people are going to be coming from. Great. With Cloudflare, it rounds, and with S3 still serving as the original backing store, but then caching it in R2, your expenses round up to 13 cents. Now, in practice, if I start pushing a petabyte of traffic in a month through Cloudflare, they're going to almost certainly call me up and say, so what's going on? Let's talk about our enterprise plans. And we're not really asking here. And that's fine.
Right.
Because I can say no and they'll turn me off, and then I can write angry things about them on the internet. Great, whatever. You know what they're not going to do? Slap me with a surprise $50,000 bill I had no idea was coming.
Right.
That's the difference. Now, let's be clear. I'm not even necessarily saying that the value for what you get with those AWS bills isn't there. There are companies that are spending, again, many hundreds of millions of dollars a year and up, and they're happy to do it because they're getting value for this. It's not that this costs too much money. It's that it's not predictable and it's inscrutable.
No worries about doxing yourself, FM. You're good, buddy. Another question from this person, though. It is pretty clear that AWS is not invested in cost visibility and making their billing data CUR accessible. How can we create an incentive for them to improve this? I somehow ended up with a PhD in AWS CUR. I want that space in my brain back.
The problem with the AWS billing system is that it is massive. I don't think anyone fully understands the scope and the scale of just how much data that thing processes. You have to be able to recreate historical customer bills to the penny years afterwards. It does an awful lot of stuff. It has to capture every charge. And remember, if it suddenly stopped working, it didn't capture any billing charges, not a single customer will complain. So it's a thankless job. It's either invisible or everyone yells at it. It's one of the oldest systems out there. And it is, like any system, built upon constraints. How do you change that in a meaningful way? It takes time and effort to do it. How do you actually impact that and get them to do it? I don't know. I've taken the approach of making fun of them. We'll see how it works.
I'm not going to touch that one. There's so many ways we could go down that rabbit hole. All right.
But seriously, the people who work on the billing system, those commerce platform, incidentally, are incredibly smart. They are very conscientious. And I don't know how to frame it other than by saying they actually do give a shit. Let's be very clear on this. They are trying to do the best they have within the constraints because they have to work with, because no one wakes up in the morning and says, you know what I'm going to do today? A super shitty job that no one's proud of, unless they work at Facebook, in which case, have fun, go for it. But they do care. They want these things to work, and they have incredible barriers they have to surmount. And I have it on good authority. They are, in fact, surmounting a lot of them. I'm curious and excited to see what happens. Remember how crappy Cost Explorer was when it launched? Not so much anymore.
Yes, it has gotten a lot better. Oh, this is a good one. Okay, Margot Beck. This one was actually my favorite announcement from reInvent. So I'd be curious to see what your perspective is on this. Thoughts on the addition of the sustainability pillar to the AWS well-architected framework? Do you think that it's more for show, or will it truly impact how customers are approaching their technical debt?
In many cases, it's going to be counterproductive. Let's be clear. I have my newsletter production system costs, let's round it up, it's been a busy month, to $10 this month. If I Google how to optimize that for sustainability, I am having a bigger carbon footprint in the next 5 years of running it as it is, just with that Google search. It is at small scale, it is not relevant to what we're doing.
Mhm.
Counterpoint, large scale, you're spending $200 million a year on AWS. What sustainable choices do you want to make? And a large part of this is on AWS's side. I don't get to help them negotiate with their suppliers for greener things. I don't understand what their energy deals look like. I have no visibility into it. And on some level, it's like, isn't this sort of your problem? But what I really want to see is, what is the carbon footprint of me storing a petabyte of data in S3 versus on EBS versus Glacier? And the challenge is by publishing those numbers, which you're going to have to do at some point, it provides tremendous insight into their per service margins. And that is something that is going to potentially have consequences because companies don't like to do that.
Well, I mean, that could potentially be counterproductive to Amazon, but from the perspective of the customer burning the $200 million a month or a year.
Generally a year. I don't know of any customers yet that are spending that per month, but give it time. Actually, let's be clear. When people do big bulk reservation purchases, okay. But as a common amortized flat line, I'm sure they're out there somewhere, but I haven't found them yet. If you are, call me.
Once we stop recording, I'll tell you some stories.
Good.
Cool. Oh, Al Rashid just came on. Sorry, I'm late. I guess I'll catch the recording. No worries, Al.
No worries, I'm still here.
Al, if you do have any questions, we actually have finished the Q&A from what I lovingly call the peanut gallery. Let me double check the tweetosphere too. Sean, have you seen anything else? You got any more on you?
Ask me anything. Is what I'm here for.
No, I'm asking Sean Doyle. Does he have anything left over?
I'm trying to encourage said peanut gallery. Please ask me things. I didn't come here to dodge questions.
Okay, Adam Fisher. Even though you throw out a lot of snark,
you think?
It seems like there is an underlying intent that it could possibly help improve some AWS shortcomings. Is this a fair statement? And if so, do you think AWS takes it that way as well?
A couple of things. First, you're right. I have a tremendous amount of respect for AWS's services. If I didn't actually like the company and their products, what I'm doing is basically requires a diagnosis and probably restraining order to go along with it. Let's be clear. That is something that is important to consider on a number of different levels. So from there, I always like 90 to 95% of what they do is great. The missing 5% is, frustrating as a customer. I am first and foremost a customer. And it also is rife with hilarity on some level. Like, there's a reason that I make so much fun of service names. No one is going to sit there like offended, like, that joke wasn't funny. I spent 18 months naming systems manager, session manager. No, you didn't. And if you did, maybe you should feel a little shitty today. I'm sorry, but it's not a good name. But instead, it's the snark is engaging. It's a pointed position that most folks can't take. Most folks have partnership agreements and concerns about commercial relationships and, a veneer of professionalism they aspire to. I've given that all up long ago. This is the last job I'll ever have. What does it really matter on some level? It just keeps it entertaining and it keeps it fun, or at least I try to. Now, as far as how AWS takes it, in my mind, for the longest time, I was convinced a big company was one that has more than 200 people there. I have spoken to an awful lot of Amazonians who understand where I'm coming from in the spirit which is intended. I've spoken to a number of them who can't stand it, and then I talk to them, and once they actually get to know me as more than just the Twitter snarky person, I was like, wait, you're not what I was expecting. I get it. No one reads everything. I'm prolific. I talk about stuff a lot, and when you only get bits and pieces, you get a very weird view. And then there's the other piece of it as well, which is the vast majority of people at Amazon have never heard of me. And I know it sounds weird, but I've spoken to 10,000 AWS employees in a single room before. And when I said, who here has never heard of me before today, 3/4 of them raised their hand. And that's fine. I don't expect that everyone pay attention to what I say. Remember, my position is just one person's opinion by and large. I have an obnoxious habit of being right a lot, like the leadership principle. But other than that, I'm not infallible. And if I get it wrong, please talk to me.
All right. Ken Nalbone, this is a good one. What are some of the more quote unquote unique decisions a customer of yours has made that has led to an incomprehensible AWS bill?
What are some of the unique decisions? There was one a few years ago where I'm looking at it at like they wound up having 280 something billion objects in an S3 bucket. It's like, okay, that's high. Wait, was that billion with a B? Yes, it is. What what you doing over there, buddy? Like, well, we built our own columnar database on top of it. And this may not have been the right decision. It's like, I'm going to stop you there based upon no other information. It was not. Please continue. But again, the trick of being a consultant is there are always context that shapes things, and you don't necessarily see why.
Hmm.
The easiest thing in the world to do as a crap consultant is to show up and say, what moron built this? Invariably, you're asking that question to said moron. And again, they don't work at Facebook. They are not trying to make poor decisions. So there's probably a constraint you didn't see. Maybe they weren't aware of something. Maybe this predates the right way of doing things in some respect.
Mm-hmm.
And having respect for what came before is critically important in understanding the context here.
And Ken confirms I am that moron. I agree. I agree. That
Oh,
is
yes.
that is entirely true. All right, Nathan Bennett. With addition AMI templates, to memorize, do we ever see AWS changing their shape for CPU to something more like Oracle, or am I forever to be lost within the myriads of T3 MI holy F word?
I used to wind up thinking that, like, what did someone do? Wind up beating their head on the keyboard to name these EC2 instances, and looking at them, it's like they almost certainly did. It's like we're seeing more and more configurability. I don't know what the future of those things hold. Like before reInvent, there were 384 distinct Linux EC2 configuration options in EC2 alone.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And great, that means, like, am I using the right instance size and family? Oh, almost certainly not, because what are the odds you are? And that becomes an increasing challenge. It's the paradox of choice, really. It's like my first white collar job working summers when I came home from college was selling products for a promotional products company. They had almost 10,000 different kinds of pens. Turns out if you show up and try and sell someone that many, they're not buying anything. Show up
Right.
with 3.
Right.
Which one of these do you want? Well, I'd love that one if it only had a clip on it. Do you have anything like that? Absolutely. And then you can get into the nonsense. But but like that is sort of the challenge here. It's how do you wind up articulating this? How do you wind up explaining this? How do you wind up reasoning around all the things that they offer? I also don't ever make future-looking predictions on these things. The reason being is that, first, if I get it wrong, I look like a fool. Great. If I get it right, people will think that I leaked, which is not acceptable. And if I know that something is coming out, a great example of this is I knew in advance that Graviton 3 was going to be announced. And if I start doing predictions and I don't mention that one, it's like, what? You couldn't figure out that they were going to launch Graviton 3? I mean, the obvious answer is, yeah, I just thought they'd give it a dumber name. But, it's it's an obvious thing. And it just doesn't end well for me at all. There's no upside and a whole bunch of downsides. So I don't spend too much time gazing into the future on those things.
Fair enough. Okay, so CTO advisor, we're gonna have to wrap this up a little bit. I know that we're running long on our time, so
No, it's fine. You have me in the calendar on this thing for another 45 minutes.
well, I know, but normally we say it's I mean, if you're good, we're good. We can still.
Please.
Okay.
I will answer questions till you stop asking them.
All right, Keith Townsend, CTO advisor. How hard is it to find cloud economists? It seems like it's a tough recruiting job.
It is and it isn't at the same time. The building blocks for it are someone with an SRE type background who's worked at scale and understands the ins and outs of this, because it is easier to teach those people finance constructs than to take a finance person and so there's this thing called cloud. Strap in. This is going to be a very short 8-year training session. It doesn't work. So there's that. They have to obviously be customer facing, which is not the ridiculous challenge you'd think. Consulting experience is super helpful on that. And it has to be someone who is comfortable presenting to people at a variety of different personas, often in the same room, which is challenging but possible to find. It's it is easier than you would think because a lot of these SRE types that we're looking for, it's like, so you know how you wind up constantly dreading work and what's going to break next? Yeah, we run no production systems, and you're never on call. We work ideally 40 hours a week ish, and then go home and don't think about this. The AWS bill is strictly a business hours problem. Now, the only time that gets a little weird is it turns out our clients are global. So we've had a couple of times now where we have basically 3 customers that are like each 8 hours apart. So it was a little rough for that month, but we find ways.
So Vidor actually mentioned this twice now in the chat, not the QA. So Vidor, we're not. Do you have any plans of offering like training on billing, like building best practices or anything like that, or maybe even a master class?
Not immediately. There are other things I'm tackling first. I like the idea on some level, but part of the trick as well is that I talk to companies all the time, like, you need to come in and do a deep training for our engineers. And it's, no, I don't, because what most engineers need to know about AWS billing fits on an index card. Maybe I should have index cards printed. But this idea that some companies are going toward of, oh, developers should be fully aware of the cost impact of what they do. Yeah, in an ideal world, great. But engineers, by and large, and I say this as someone who fell victim to this all the time and still do occasionally myself, they are not being fully aware of the strategic priorities on this. Left to their own devices, if you have one of these open source projects like InfraCost or whatnot spinning out, oh, this change will wind up increasing your bill for this month by $200. Like, well, I'm going to spend a week knocking that down to $150. It's, you get that you have to generate more value than you cost, right? And because that is irrelevant in the scheme of things.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, show back, charge back. Yeah, all the fun nonsense there. Oh, yeah.
Right.
Cloud was basically an end run around central IT. Then central IT got involved, and now there's other shadow IT things. Like all right, how do we get around this? The AWS marketplace. Then procurement caught wise, and now it's working with procurement, and it's always an arms race.
Very fair points. How do you run Stop Lying Cloud? How is it kept up to date?
I have an old blog post on this. 2 lambdas diverged, and that is part of it, where I wound up originally having it done in line with Lambda edge functions. This is a terrible mistake because Lambda edge functions are terrible. Now I wound up, I can solve this with a gentle application of sheer brute force, which is once a minute, a CloudWatch event fires off that invokes a Lambda that grabs the ridiculous 8 megabyte file that is the existing status page, runs the whole transformation on it, and stuffs that into an S3 bucket. Next, that thing winds up then having a CloudFront distribution in front of it with caching disabled that sources back to that. That's all it is. But it is funny. So it's basically stale by up to a minute. Unless the status page breaks, and it theoretically be stale forever.
All right, I think we have 2 more. Well, nope, we have 1. So how did you decide you didn't want to be CEO and wanted to focus on client delivery
And content creation.
Yep.
Sure. A disturbing amount of this company is process around my own shortcomings psychologically. I will never be the type of person that follows a checklist. I will not do things repeatedly and well. My expression of ADHD is challenging. That said, I can spend all my time trying to shore up those shortcomings, or I can ignore them and do the things I'm actually great at. And a lot of what I do does not lend itself to being an effective manager of people and leader of company. There's a reason that I have a business partner, Mike Julian, who's spectacular at a lot of the things that I am not. It frees me up to wind up focusing on things that are significantly higher value than, honestly, something that is a lot easier to find that I will never be good at. Believe it or not, this is not about my own personal aggrandizement here.
Now Chris, I don't know. Do we have time? Corey, do you have time to hang on?
You have me for the 45 minutes according to my schedule, so please keep talking.
Okay, great. So from Eric Sherrill, what's the next move once all of your wishes are granted and the AWS bill is simple, predictable, and transparent? Wouldn't duck bill group cease to exist, or would you adapt or move to another cloud, say Azure or Oracle?
It's super easy for people to fall into the mistake of assuming that our consulting is purely about optimizing AWS bills. That's half of it. The other half is very hard to talk about publicly because what we do is we negotiate AWS contracts on behalf of our customers with AWS. And to be clear, AWS loves it when we get involved. And it's a little counterintuitive, but the reason behind that is it's not what you would think. It's not like buying a used car from an asshole. This is when you're negotiating with the company is going to run your production infrastructure. You can't basically insult them the whole time. You can, they'll take it, but you shouldn't. You have to collaborate with these people because when they run your production infrastructure, they're your partner, whether you want them to be or not. Instead of like someone salty from the last negotiation and I want to get bigger points on this, it's like, set it aside. What do you actually want to get here? And because we do so many of these, it's, look, I know you want custom SLAs, but I assure you, your 3-year spend is this other company's month, and they didn't get one either. You will not. Let me be very clear on this. But why do you think you need it? Like it shortcuts a whole lot of things. The requests get more reasonable, the data gets better, and the signing goes much more smoothly. And that is never something AWS is going to be able to solve themselves just because it turns out that this is the deal and you should sign it by someone whose email address ends in Amazon.com is not the bulletproof endorsement you would hope it would be.
Sure, sure.
I also kind of despair of ever seeing a solution to solving all these problems because cloud economics is far more about psychology than it is about math. And I don't think that is well understood.
Yeah,
100%.
and problems will never go away. I always quote RFC 1918 from the networking world of, every new solution is just an old solution with a new name on it. So, but we're always going to have, every system is fallible. We're always going to have problems. Chris, you want to ask a few? I mean, they're popping in at a rapid rate now, so we have quite a bit to catch up on.
Yeah. So this is a really good one. Are you starting to see? Well, actually, do you see any Azure and GCP bills, or are you?
No, people ask about it, but we don't do them. So it's one of those.
Okay.
Look, This is important. There's I've talked about how I started out doing this, but the thing that I think has been misinterpreted in some cases has been the idea that, oh, just fake it till you make it. Not really. You have to be able to deliver. I don't have insight into those environments. And it turns out that, yes, I am capable of sounding incredibly confident when I don't know what I'm talking about, but that doesn't serve customers well. And I'm not venture backed. I'm bootstrapped, which means we have this ancient business model called we make more money than we spend every month.
That's crazy, Tom.
I don't need to have the venture scale opportunity of cornering the entire market. I don't need every AWS customer to come and do business with me. I need a dozen or two a year, and that's it. And it turns out, for the foreseeable future, AWS will have at least that many customers. IBM Cloud may not, but AWS will. Sorry, IBM Cloud. Continue.
There you go. All right. Nice air quotes. Margot Beck, when consulting customers on AWS, what do you think are some of the most important skills you utilize in getting work done? Oh, this goes back to your psychology comment. Yeah. Most important skill you utilize in getting work done: technical prowess, snark, empathy, something else?
Asking questions every time. It's trying to understand what people are actually getting at and ask the dumb question you already know the answer to, because there's a terrific chance that you might be surprised by the answer. It's you want to, you have your AWS bill is too high and you want to bring us in to lower it. Great. Why do you care? It sounds weird, but it's always the opening question, because it's, what is the actual concern here that's driving you to reach out? Is this actually strategically important to the business? Is it just a passing fancy? Is there actual pain that you're experiencing from this? Because if not, I have nothing that I'm going to sell you, because if you don't have a painful problem, you don't need a consultant.
It's actually funny that you say that. So I use that exact same process, but I call it beginner's mind. Whenever I go into talk with a customer about an architecture or a process or what they're trying to do, I always ask the dumb questions, like what is the thing that you're trying to get to? Why is this important to the business? Going back to the beginner's mind of just looking at it with fresh eyes instead of, we've
what else have you tried? Have you had your own existing staff look into the AWS bill? There are a whole bunch of SaaS tools out there. Have you tried any of those? Spoiler, they won't work, but it's worth the question. Have you reached out to your account team at AWS, which is, some of them are fantastic at this. that tends to be a rarity, to be perfectly honest with you, because they have so many other things they need to focus on. And let's be clear, it sounds weird, but cost is not the number one concern of most AWS customers.
Yeah, I feel bad for those guys. They get a lot of heat. Okay. Unfulfilled. Okay. Let's skip that one. Keith, I got beat up the other. Oh wait, no, that's not a question. That's a comment. Once, okay, this might be a no. You wrote a blog post called "The Unfulfilled Promise of Serverless." Jeremy Daly wrote a thoughtful reply. Then Mark Nunnenkoven wrote a thoughtful reply to the thoughtful reply. Did you read either of them, and do you agree with them or disagree with them?
And let's add something to that just real quick. If you did read either and you do agree or disagree, could you provide a little bit of back context here for people in the audience who maybe
who didn't read any of this, and I have no idea what he's talking about.
Here. This is not always well understood. The three of us are friends. Let's be clear on that here. It's so this is not one of those this is not like basically angry flame war style via blog post.
No. Oh no, yeah, we didn't think that either.
Honestly, the reason I wrote the post originally was that serverless had a lot of promise, but it's not perceived as an expensive business function, and we're only going to talk about this in the context of functions as a service, because otherwise we wind up with scope creep and changing definitions. Then you had Jeremy Daly, who's deep in the serverless space, wrote a very thoughtful reply that says, no, there's an unfulfilled potential here. And he's right. And then Mark Nunnenkoven came in and basically played peacemaker on this, but there are different ways to think about this, and here's how I reconcile it. I thought it was a beautiful three-piece arc. We did not plan it, to be clear, but all three of us have and I didn't see any of those other posts before they were published, but at the same time, we all have a working respect for it. If I had reached out to one of them and said, I really disliked your characterization of my blog post, they would have been devastated. The same way I would be if if they said, I felt you shit on my blog post. Like, no, it wasn't my intention at all. And I don't think any of us took it that way. It's just different perspectives around these things. There's obviously something to serverless, or people would not be doing some of the things that they're doing. It is also equally, obviously, not the default answer for most things. There are challenges with it. I just wanted to have that conversation because it seems that most folks who start those conversations have the word like serverless evangelist or whatnot in their title, wherever they happen to work. And there's a business incentive there. Personally, I don't give a crap if you use serverless, EC2 instances, shut your AWS environment down, move it all DigitalOcean. I don't care. It's do the thing that makes sense for you. You almost certainly have more context into what you're doing than I am. I'm just providing a different lens through which to view some of these things. If I get you to ask questions, like when I write my whole multi-cloud is a terrible idea approach, you say, well, hang on, we made a considered decision to go multi-cloud. What do you think about that? I think you're probably right, because you have context into your specific use case and you have weighed the trade-offs. I'm willing to look and dig into it and find out why, but my default response is not, what a bunch of morons. Like that's not what's happening here.
Do you use that voice too?
I use all kinds of funny voices. That's the real secret of cloud economics.
All right. So anonymous attendee, this kind of ties back a little bit to a previous one. If you could say something to AWS partners who are setting up customer environments, what would you tell them to do?
Not the AWS partners. Sorry, I know that's cynical and weird, but there's several kinds. Like the people that are selling software in the marketplace, that's great. A lot of these partners are the integrators who are doing reseller agreements and the rest. And I have yet to hear a clear articulation of you should buy through a reseller rather than from AWS directly, because please go ahead and finish that sentence, because the answers I've heard have made no sense. Because we can wind up getting better discounting and all the rest. Yeah, injecting someone else into that sensitive of a relationship is a problem, because that adds some significant friction to many use cases. Is that worth another 5% discount on your bill? I'd posit probably not, given that I can come in an afternoon and get somewhere between 10 to 20 knocked off your bill with a few hours of work. Let's instead focus on the important things that actually matter. And I assure you, changing your AWS bill by 5% will not materially change the trajectory of your business. Whereas injecting someone into basically potentially causing problems for the relationship with you and your cloud provider, it might. And
giving them root.
Exactly. Basically. I'm not saying these people are necessarily doing anything wrong or are operating from a position of poor faith. They're not. They're trying to do something that is useful and valued. And historically, having resellers was a great thing. But now it's when you're getting everything from AWS anyway, what is the value that you offer?
That's actually an interesting conundrum that I am currently in the process of figuring out with my company. We are on the other side of that conversation, and our folks are asking, how do we convince our customers to do that? And my response to that is make it valuable to them. Make that process low effort, low friction, and then give them a reason to do it. Other than 5 to 7%, because nobody cares about that. Give them a good value for it.
All right, let's say I go into my customers, for example, the ones spending hundreds of millions a year. Great. You think AWS is going to be super thrilled of, hi, I'm now their reseller. They're going to hit me with a belt. And not for nothing, like, great, wow, that means I sit on my ass and I make millions of dollars a year in reseller fees. Yeah, but I'll never sleep again because there's one, the payment risk if they don't pay me on time, and then AWS is like, where's our money? There's the fact that I have the giant risk of anything even slightly goes wrong, like the damages provision, the liability and whatnot means I don't have a company anymore. It's no, thank you.
Yeah, it's
I'm here to add value, and I don't see that reselling AWS services to my customers does that. It feels like it's rent seeking, to be perfectly honest with you, and that's not how I operate.
Yeah, and it's something that, because
one of my favorite things to do is turn down prospective sponsors of my media stuff because, like, we'd like to spend money to advertise with you. I don't think that's a good idea, because what I do is top of funnel in a marketing context. It is getting more eyeballs onto your site, for example. And if you don't already have a functional funnel that winds up converting those drive-bys into paying customers at the end, you are effectively wasting your money unless there's something else going on that I don't see. Like, I'm not here to just basically make $1 wherever I can. I assure you there are far easier and less ethical ways to do it than the way I approach things.
All right. Last question. We're putting a pin in this, and this is a good one to leave on too. Keith Townsend, once again, has your position on multi-cloud changed fundamentally?
No, not at all. I think that my position on multi-cloud has been misinterpreted.
Okay.
Because my position on multi-cloud is, as a default position, it is not something to pursue for most workloads. And I'm talking about multi-cloud in the sense of, I built this one app and I need it to run everywhere. Yeah, that is going to slow you down. It's going to be a lot of effort. There are exceptions to this. If you are a SaaS company and are selling a service to companies, you have to meet them where they are. So yeah, that thing needs to be deployed out there. But if you're trying to do it for resilience purposes, no, you're exposing yourself to everyone's failures and not gaining anything in return for it. By avoiding the higher level up the stack services that all of the cloud providers offer, you are having to do a lot of wheel reinvention yourself. I don't think that ends well for anyone.
And you're not taking advantage of the actual service, the actual bespoke services to that cloud that make them the reason to go to that cloud.
Right. Well, what about for negotiation leverages? Again, I don't care about a couple of percentage points in the overall scheme. Plus, let's be clear here, the way that all the cloud providers do spend discount calculations is based upon the total spend and how much you're willing to commit to. So yeah, I'm going to divide that into two different directions. You're not going to get as decent a deal on that as you would otherwise.
Right.
But I am suggesting you go multiple cloud for different workloads. Like, for example, I use AWS for my infrastructure, but if you think I'm using Workmail for my email accounts, you're out of your tree. My God, that thing has no customers. I'm also I'm using GitHub because, that makes the most sense. And code commit is basically a sales pitch for GitHub. And I use, what else have I got? Yeah, I've got Office 365 because, WorkDocs is apparently maybe kind of a thing somewhere for one person, but you pick the best of breed for a lot of those things, but those are different workloads. Those are different use cases. I'm not saying one vendor, ride or die. I am saying by default, pick a provider. I don't care which one, and go all in until you have a reason to change that.
Nice.
And maybe until you have because it does put an undue amount of pressure on engineering teams that have to support that platform when you're all of a sudden saying, we're all in on AWS, or just as an example, and then it's like, hey, we're going to GCP now for new stuff too, and now you have to learn how to maintain that as well. Good luck with that, right? So
right, it's like, or I could walk down the street and take my very much in demand AWS skills down the street, and wait, you'll pay me how much? See ya.
Right.
Yeah, people work on the technologies they want to work on. Like honestly, the reason that I pick AWS to build on, to be very clear, is not because they are the best. In many cases, they are not. What I can say though is I know how it breaks. And that's one of the most valuable things in the world. I don't just mean technically, I mean organizationally, I mean culturally, etc. I know it's the devil I know, for lack of a better term. Yeah.
Right.
Somebody just said that no company plans to be multi-cloud. Exactly. It's not you get it. Oh, well, we just bought a company. They're on GCP, so we should migrate them to our primary thing. No, you shouldn't. Having different cloud providers per division is just fine. Because remember, migrating between cloud providers is a huge undertaking. What's the value you're getting by doing that?
Right.
Like, well, we are the competing cloud provider. It looks kind of bad if one of our companies runs on a different provider, with a counterpoint that if you do a DNS query on video.nest.com, which Google has bought many years ago, it still points to an AWS load balancer. So, you know, some of these things are, it's funny, but it doesn't actually mean anything substantive, and that's okay. There are strategic reasons, there are optics reasons, but as far as this is somehow going to be the best for us, I don't know that that's necessarily true. But again, you have context that I don't for your specific use case.
Right.
But the sad part is that there's a lot of third-party vendors who are strongly pushing multi-cloud because their whole shtick is that they do integration things between those different providers. And if you go all in, they have nothing left to sell you.
Yes.
That's a little self-serving from my perspective. Remember, I only fix AWS bills. And if someone says, well, we're thinking about building on Google Cloud, great. You tell me why and make sure it's not for something that isn't true. But yeah, go ahead and do it. It's great. I am not trying to conquer the world here. And if it gets to a point where someday I can't find any AWS customers because they're all on Google Cloud, yeah, I'm not going to sit here basically be like the last mainframe repair person here. I'm paying attention to the industry. Let's be clear here. But I have no plans to make any significant changes in the foreseeable future.
One customer left. Hey, can I help you save some money on that bill? Nice.
How about now? Yeah.
So we have completely run out of questions. Corey, as always, thank you for changing your name to your actual name this time. I appreciate it.
That was the thing that you set up with the link. I didn't realize. Oh yeah, let me fix that. Cool. No worries.
Well, again, a pleasure having you on as always.
A pleasure to be had.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for the insight. The folks obviously really enjoyed it, and we got a ton of really good questions answered. So we'll put this.
Thank you for having me, and remember, everyone, make good choices and turn off your managed NAT gateways.
All right, everybody, have a great night. We'll talk to you later.
And we all smile and wave like an old-timey steamship.
Yeah.